This is the Navigating Adult ADHD podcast, here to help you navigate and thrive with ADHD in adulthood. I'm your host, Zena, and I was diagnosed at age 36. As with many ADHDers, I have a rebellious and nonconformist style, and that means that there will likely be swearing in the coming episode. Please be mindful of any little people. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Navigating Adult ADHD podcast, where today we're going to start unpacking executive functions. Now, there is a lot of information out there as it relates to executive functions, and it does vary slightly from expert to expert. And my aim today has been to really simplify it, make it easy to understand, and then be able to apply to ourselves. Okay, so I've done the research and I am here to share it with you all. So when we talk about executive functions, we can break it down into 6 areas. 1 is self-awareness. Number 2, inhibition. Number 3, working memory. Number 4, emotional regulation. Number 5, self-motivation. And number 6 is planning and problem solving. So I want you to imagine working in an ice cream factory. Now, I picked an ice cream factory because when I was a kid, we went on a tour of an ice cream factory and it was super fun. Probably because we got to pick an ice cream of our choice at the end. But it was really fun to go through and see the ins and outs in operating an ice cream factory. So you are the owner and the CEO of this company that produces ice cream. And you have 6 different managers in the 6 main areas that need to work together in order for the ice cream to be made, packaged, and shipped off to the stores. Okay, so again, you're the CEO and the owner of this company, and you have 6 managers in the main areas that must work together in order to get the ice cream into the containers and shipped out to the stores. So you would probably have a manager for raw materials, another manager for mixing and making, another manager for freezing, another manager for packaging, one for quality control, and number 6 would probably be shipping and distribution. Now, executive functions come together to help us complete tasks and achieve goals. So we need all 6 managers to come together to complete the tasks and achieve the goals. Now, our managers don't often work well together. They don't play nice. They don't always communicate that well. And they like to do their own thing. They're a little bit rebellious like that. So in the case of the ice cream company, it can become a bit of a shit show at times, with things not lining up, tasks not getting completed, and therefore goals not being met for production. So executive functions are the various managers in our brains who help us to plan, to organize, pay attention, control our impulses, and get shit done, basically. I quite like to think that they are the secret to successfully adulting. So executive functions operate together, but they can also cause issues separately. So I am going to go through each of these 6 executive functions. I'm going to explain what they are and give an example of how it may affect you. And as I do that, I really want to encourage you to think about how each of these work for you and see if you can identify your strongest executive function and also look for your weakest executive function. Now, I do want to remind you that we are all on a spectrum with our ADHD. And what that means is how one executive function may impact you could be very, very different to how it impacts me or somebody else with ADHD. So our strengths and our weaknesses will vary, and the way in which it impacts us in our daily lives will also be different. There may be some similarities, there may be some overlap, there can also be a lot of difference there as well. In another episode, I gave you guys the way to think about it in your mind is like if you think about and picture dark forest green, which is almost black, and that's at one end of the spectrum, and then down the other end of the spectrum is pale light lime green that is so, dull in color, it's almost white or yellow, right? And there's all the varying different shades of green in between. That is what it's like to live with ADHD, and how all of the different symptoms can impact each of us, as we all have these different spectrums going on, these different shades of green in all these various areas. Okay? Hope I didn't lose you. All right. So, when we know what our weaker link is in terms of our executive functions, that is great information to have, because then we have the ability to begin working on strengthening it. So this awareness is actually very, very useful to us. So please do not use this as a reason to beat yourself up, but rather as validation and further understanding. This is ultimately another form of self-awareness that we can learn from. And as I said at the beginning, we can begin to strengthen once we've got this awareness and this information. Okay? Which brings me to number 1, which ironically is self-awareness. So self-awareness refers to understanding yourself, knowing your strengths, your weaknesses, your emotions, and how you interact with the world around you. So for those of us with ADHD, self-awareness does play a crucial role in managing and capitalizing, managing our challenges and capitalizing on our strengths. So the executive function of self-awareness is like having a mirror to see yourself in clearly. Okay? It's being able to look at yourself and see what's happening and why. So it helps us to understand our ADHD symptoms and how they affect our daily lives, our emotions, our interactions with others. It allows us to recognize our triggers and then empowering us to develop strategies to manage them and effectively seek support when needed. So let me give you an example, because I think that that's a little bit wordy. So if you're someone with ADHD who is self-aware, you may notice that you struggle with staying organized, and maybe you often misplace items like your keys and your wallet. And every time you go to jump in the car to go somewhere, you struggle to find your keys and your wallet. Now, when you have the self-awareness to know and understand that that is a result of, an impairment with ADHD and your executive functions, then you can start to look at strategies. And one of the strategies that works really well for a lot of people is having a designated spot for those items, and a spot that you either go to frequently or is right by the front door perhaps. So for us, we always put wallets and keys, and when we're not using them, cell phones, in a drawer in our kitchen. We have one designated drawer for all of those things. Other people will often have like a bowl by the front door, and it will have keys and wallets and other items in it. Okay? By being self-aware, it'll help you take proactive steps to manage your ADHD symptoms and minimize the negative impact that it may have on your daily life. So number 2 is inhibition. Now, this basically means having control over your actions and being able to stop yourself from doing or saying something impulsively. So it's kind of like having an internal brake that helps you think before you act and make more thoughtful decisions. So inhibition allows you to consider the consequences of your actions and choose the most appropriate response in a given situation. So for those of us with ADHD, it can be challenging, and we may struggle with things like impulsivity, blurting things out, interrupting people and talking over them, impulsive spending, quick decisions without considering the consequences, or also having difficulty waiting our turn, being impatient. And it can make it a little bit harder for us to control our immediate reactions and then make thoughtful decisions if this is an executive function that we have challenges with. So to give you an example, let's say you are somebody who struggles with impulsive spending. Now, when you see something you want, you may have a strong urge to buy it immediately without necessarily considering your budget, whether or not you can afford it, or any long-term financial goals that you have. So this lack of inhibition might lead to, lots of impulsive purchases, overspending, and, it could end you in debt, not meeting your financial goals, creating financial difficulties in the long run. Now, bearing in mind that we are also lacking in dopamine. So I know for my brain, sometimes in the evenings, I find myself just scrolling online shopping sites like online stores and clothing departments and things that I love. And when I'm pretty good with self-awareness, and when I see myself doing it, I'm like, oh, I'm just looking for some dopamine. That is often what's happening for me, is because we're short of dopamine. We get that kind of shot when we make a purchase. We get a hit of dopamine, and then when the package arrives and turns up, we get another dopamine hit. Okay, so just notice how that works together there. So number 3 is working memory. I love one of the examples that I found, which said it was like having a mental sticky note in your mind to temporarily hold information. Now, for people with ADHD, we can struggle to remember and organize information. For me, that often shows up as I forget names of people I have met very, very quickly and easily. It may be a challenge with following multi-step instructions or keeping track of things in your mind. So it's the capacity to hold information in the mind. So here's the irony here, my friends. In trying to really understand and simplify what working memory means, because there is a lot of information and research, and Russell Barkley actually breaks it down into 2 categories. There was non-verbal working memory and working memory. And I was really toying with whether or not to break all of that down into great detail for you here, or how much detail to give you. The funny thing is as I was doing this, and I was really struggling to hold all of the information in my mind long enough to piece it all together and then make notes for the episode. And I just thought, I may have a working memory issue going on right here, which I found very amusing. Now, I wanted to share a particular passage, or paragraph rather, from Russell Barkley's book, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD, as I found this to be incredibly relevant to one of the challenges I have. And I have identified that working memory is actually my weakest of the 6 executive functions. So I'm going to share this bit with you. He says, "You have little or no feel for the passage of time, have trouble judging how much time activities will take, and cannot manage yourself well relative to the passage of time. When non-verbal working memory and its related sense of time are disturbed by ADHD, it can leave an adult without a typical sense of time. All that seems to matter to you is what is happening now. So you live much of your life in the now rather than getting ready for what is going to happen next. It can also leave you with a sense that time is passing much more slowly than it really is. This can make you feel like you have a lot more time to get things done than you actually have. It may cause you to waste time doing things that are irrelevant to you, to your goals and your tasks. Events, deadlines, or the future itself generally arrives much sooner than expected and may catch you off guard, often leaving you in a panic or a crisis." my friends. That one really, really spoke to me. And he has a lot of beautiful examples in his book that perhaps will speak to you and how it impacts you. There are so many, I can't share them all, but don't worry, there's going to be future episodes. And I think we're going to have to do an episode on each of the individual executive functions because there is so much to share. So as I said, this is the one that I'm currently working to strengthen. And it is one that I actually was going to share an example from. The other day, I ran an online training. Now, this is maybe 2 months back. I ran an online training and I started to send out emails for the event, and I started to let my people on my email list know, and I was sharing it on social media, and people were registering to come to this event. And the event was a How to Quit Procrastinating and Get Shit Done event, and it was a 1-hour masterclass on Zoom. So I set a date a couple of weeks out, and that was based on having done it once before and knowing that a week wasn't enough time. So I decided to double it. And I gave myself 2 weeks. I started sending out these emails, created an email sequence, a page for people to register, all of that. And I allotted 2 hours on one Monday morning, exactly a week before the training, to complete the 1 hour slideshow and presentation that I was going to give. Now, I knew what I was going to give, but I hadn't, formulated it into a keynote or a PowerPoint. However, that 1 hour turned into 6 days because I hadn't really thought through all of the examples I wanted to give, all of the quotes I wanted to include, all of the activities I wanted to give. I just had this rough idea, this real misinterpretation of how long it was going to take. And it was so fascinating to me because although I had heard of the term time blindness, which we will talk about in a future episode, I didn't know that it was specifically linked to this executive function. And another thing that I think is really beautiful to understand is that sometimes those of us with ADHD can have a real trouble seeing what done looks like. So sometimes we can, have an idea of what we'd like to create, but we can't necessarily paint the picture of what done looks like. And then when we can't do that, it can be very difficult to navigate all of the pieces that need to be completed in order to get to done. So as I said, I don't want to take up too much time here on this. This is going to be something in a future episode because this is some of the work that I am doing right now to strengthen this particular executive function. Okay, and I've got a couple of clients and we're working on what that picture of done looks like, how to break it down into steps, overcome the obstacles ahead of time, and then get it literally done. Okay, so I'm so excited to share more about this with you all. All right. So next up is emotional regulation. This refers to the ability to manage and control our emotions effectively. So for people with ADHD, it can be a bit challenging. We may experience intense emotions or fluctuating emotions. Sometimes we may think that other people don't, respond appropriately or emotionally enough. We can also have difficulties in regulating our emotions, which might lead to impulsive outbursts or overreacting or a difficulty in calming down after we've been upset. That's what I'm still working on, my friends. So it can, of course, with these emotional challenges in our regulation systems, it can impact our relationships, it can impact our stress levels, and of course our overall well-being. So this is huge, and there will be so many podcasts on emotions coming because it's so much of the work I do with my clients in coaching. And just to pause and speak to this really quickly, growing up, so many of us heard things like, don't be mad, don't be sad, they're there, it's okay, you're fine, be happy, everything will be all right. And it very much kind of taught us that we should feel positive and be happy all of the time, and that there was something wrong with our negative emotions. So we have this kind of misunderstood, understanding, I guess, of what it means to feel the way we feel and process our emotions. And we're kind of misled to think that we should be happy all the time, which actually isn't correct. That is very much a toxic positivity theory, shall we say. Okay? All right, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. I could. I want to give you an example, though, of emotional regulation and what this may look like. So if you are someone who struggles with this when faced with a frustrating task or a situation that perhaps didn't go the way you wanted it to, you may become easily overwhelmed and respond with anger and, frustration, lashing out at other people or engaging in impulsive behaviors. So when you are able to improve those emotional regulation skills, then you can learn techniques, whether that be, nervous system regulation, which sometimes looks like certain breathing techniques, or, using your 5 senses to understand what's happening and be able to calm and soothe your body. Things like taking a break or specific self-talk that is used to calm you down. There are a lot of different tools and techniques, okay? But when we're able to enhance our emotional regulation, we can become better at managing our emotions and then handling challenging situations. And of course, that can lead to maintaining healthier relationships. So the next one here is self-motivation. So this is the ability to initiate tasks, to get started, to keep going as well, and to persevere towards our goals. So for those of us with ADHD, this can be challenging due to difficulties as well with maintaining focus, with prioritizing tasks, and managing our distractions. So as you can see, all of our different ADHD symptoms kind of work together, and it can create a bit of an interesting cocktail at times. So as I said, with self-motivation, that could impact our ability to start tasks, to stay motivated throughout them, to get them completed in a timely manner. I hear from so many ADHDers who just say, I just can't get started. If I could just get started, right? And that used to be me, so I get it. Now, I want to give you an example of this. So if you are somebody who struggles with self-motivation, you may have perhaps a deadline or a work deadline or an assignment that you are completing for study that has got a due date on it. And you may feel really overwhelmed by the amount of work that's required, and you may get easily distracted by external stimulus like cell phones and other people and, more exciting things to do like going to meet friends for coffee or out for dinner. And you may struggle just to maintain your attention on it. Okay? So when we're able to improve our self-motivation skills, it helps to be able to break things down into smaller chunks. And one thing that I think is really important with self-motivation is being able to add dopamine to a task, to add pleasure and joy and reward to a task. So whether that's we make the task itself enjoyable, and oftentimes we can, right? Or we have like these mini chunks that we break it down into, and we give ourselves the joy and the reward and the dopamine in between the sections. So I think that's a really important way to, use our self-motivation. Okay. And the last one I want to talk about is planning and problem solving. So this is the ability, and as I said, like you can see how all of these kind of intertwine, right? Planning and problem solving is the ability to think ahead, to set goals, to create strategies, to overcome obstacles ahead of time, which is something I love to do, and to find solutions to challenges. So for adults with ADHD, planning and problem solving can be difficult, especially when, we have trouble organizing our thoughts, prioritizing tasks, seeing the logical order in which things need to get done. If we have challenges with time, right, breaking things down into manageable steps, we may struggle with this. Also with anticipating obstacles, seeing, what could happen. And that's such a wicked skill to be able to develop, is especially when you're setting a goal and planning to do something, is sitting down and thinking about how much time it will take, when you will do it, what obstacles could arise, and how you will overcome them ahead of time. Okay. So let's go through an example of this. So with an adult who has ADHD, it could be a difficulty in planning and managing work tasks. So perhaps you struggle to prioritize what needs to get done at work. I remember when I was years ago, it feels like a previous life, and I was running a travel agency. And you would have clients coming in all the time and they would want quotes for holidays. And sometimes people would already have holidays and they would need to change things or make alterations to their booking. And maybe they wanted to stay longer and they were overseas. You had to continuously prioritize what order things would get done in. Would you drop the quote that you were in the middle of for somebody who was going in 6 months in order to change a booking for somebody who's already overseas, who had just phoned you? And it was a really challenging environment. Back then, I didn't know I had ADHD, but it makes so much sense now because you had people constantly walking in and the phone constantly ringing, and you had this ever-growing list of quotes you needed to do, people you needed to respond to, travel arrangements you needed to confirm, to book, travel documentation that needed to be sent to clients. There was so much happening in all of these different things. So being able to prioritize it and then break projects down was so important. And that sometimes was a real challenge. And what that looked like for me when I wasn't, planning and prioritizing well, when I would get overwhelmed, is I was taking work home in the evenings and working for a few hours every single night at home, or I was staying late in the office, or I was going in early as well. So, things that really help with this today are, the ability to have a running, like I have a piece of paper next to me all the time and I'm always writing everything I think of on that list just to make sure that nothing gets forgotten. And every day I go through that list and I add what I need to into my calendar. I rearrange any of my priorities. I keep things up to date and kind of flowing all the time. But also using specific calendaring systems, task management apps, and asking for help. That has been a huge one. Asking for help. Huge. Okay, my friends. So in order to begin strengthening your executive functions, hopefully by now you can see where you are strongest and maybe where you are weakest. Now, let's talk about 3 things that I recommend for you to begin strengthening them. So number 1 is hire a therapist or a coach who specializes in working with people who have ADHD. And preferably somebody who uses cognitive behavioral tools and techniques. Like me, for example, I use CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because this is a cognitive thing that we are talking about. Okay, so you want to work with someone who uses those specific tools, strategies, methods to help you thrive and create strategies. Now, guys, this is me, okay? Remember, I am a coach. I have worked with hundreds of women with ADHD to help them thrive. So you can book a consult to have a chat with me about this over on my website, zenajones.com. Number 2 is to get yourself a copy of Russell Barkley's book, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD. There is so much in there that helps you really understand how all of our executive functions work together and how you can strengthen them. He's got some really good tools and strategies that he talks about and walks you through and helps you to apply for your ADHD. And the third thing that I highly recommend you do, my friends, is that you click subscribe to this very podcast, Navigating Adult ADHD podcast, because we are only up to episode number 9, my friends. And we have got so much that I'm going to be unpacking and covering in the episodes that come ahead to help you thrive with your ADHD. All right, my friends, that's a wrap. Huge love to you all. Take care. Hey, friend. I know exactly what it's like to feel frustrated and confused with your ADHD and to wish that you could better understand what the hell is going on in your brain. And that's exactly why I created my coaching program, Thriving with ADHD. Inside Thriving with ADHD, you learn a step-by-step process to set and finally achieve your goals, to understand yourself and your ADHD. It's where you learn to feel better and manage your emotions and create systems and processes that work for you with your ADHD brain. This is designed for you to learn how to thrive with ADHD so you can create the life that you were meant to live. Visit zenajones.com/ADHD to learn more and book a consultation.